She gets the leftovers. My real granddaughter gets the Jeep. My mother said it calmly at my daughter's 18th birthday while Hannah sat there holding a $15 bracelet. I told her to give it back. Then I placed the keys to a paid-off Mustang GT in her hand. My mother went pale. But the Mustang was not what scared her most, because I already knew the question she could not answer. Where did the money for that Jeep really come from? The bracelet still had the $14.99 sticker on the bottom. I noticed it before Hannah did. We were in a private room at an Italian restaurant in Fort Wayne for Hannah and Kelsey's 18th birthday dinner. My mother slid the little box toward Hannah with a smile. Inside was a thin, silver-colored bracelet from a clearance rack. Hannah turned the box over, saw the price, then smiled anyway. That smile hit me harder than the sticker. I knew it. I had worn the same smile through childhood. It was the one you used when someone hurt you in public, and you were expected to make everyone else comfortable afterward. Then Kelsey opened her envelope. Car keys dropped into her palm. My mother stood and announced that a brand new Jeep Wrangler was waiting outside. The room broke into applause. Hannah was still holding the little bracelet box. My mother let the cheering settle before saying Kelsey had earned a university scholarship and knew where her life was going. Hannah, she said, was starting at community college and still figuring things out. Then she mentioned Mark managing an auto parts store, as if honest work became smaller when she said it slowly enough. I asked, "So the bracelet is Hannah's reward?" My mother folded her cloth napkin beside her plate. "Please don't make a scene, Julia." Then she looked at Hannah. "Different choices earn different rewards." She paused. "She gets the leftovers. My real granddaughter gets the Jeep." There is a kind of cruelty that is hard to fight because it never raises its voice. It sits up straight, uses a cloth napkin, and calls favoritism reality. Mark started pushing his chair back. I put my hand on his arm. "Wait!" Hannah's smile was disappearing in pieces. Her mouth softened, her chin lowered, her eyes filled, but she would not let the tears fall. That was when something inside me shifted. I had not only given my daughter my eyes and the shape of my chin, I had taught her how to survive my mother. I looked at the bracelet. "Give it back." Hannah pushed the box across the table. I reached into my purse and set another set of keys in front of her. A black Ford key fob. The silver Mustang emblem caught the light. "That one is yours." I told her the Mustang GT outside was paid in full. My mother laughed and said, "I must have buried us in debt to prove a point." Before I could answer, the dining room door opened. Daniel Reed from the dealership stepped inside, carrying a large manila envelope. He did not open it. Not yet. My mother thought that night had started with the Mustang. She was wrong. It had started years earlier, when I was still the daughter who learned to step out of the picture so my sister could stand in the middle. Long before there was a Jeep, there was a picture frame on my mother's living room mantel. Actually, there were several. Denise's school portraits were always there. First grade with missing teeth, middle school with braces, senior year in a navy blue sweater. Mine usually ended up in the kitchen drawer with old batteries, takeout menus, and pens that barely worked. Children notice where their pictures are kept. I did not have words for that when I was young. I only knew Denise was the daughter my mother talked about with energy. I was the daughter she described as doing fine. That difference followed us into adulthood. When Denise got married, my mother planned a country club reception, with custom flowers and a cake that needed its own table. She stayed until the last guests left. When Mark and I married, our reception was smaller. My mother arrived with a grocery store sheet cake and left early. For years, I told myself none of that mattered. It was not the money that stayed with me. It was the effort. Later, the same pattern settled over our daughter so quietly that I almost convinced myself I was imagining it. If Kelsey had a soccer tournament, my mother knew the schedule weeks ahead. She brought a folding chair and snacks. If Hannah had a recital or school event, there was usually a reason she could not make it. Once, after my mother missed another performance, Hannah asked me, "Grandma just likes soccer more, right?" I said, "Probably." I still think about that answer. It was a small lie, meant to protect a child from a larger truth. At the time, I thought I was keeping peace. I changed the subject. I told Hannah, "Grandma did not mean anything by it." I reminded her not to take things personally. I thought I was protecting her from conflict. Later, I understood I was teaching her how to live with it. That kind of accommodation can pass through a family without anyone naming it. Sometimes it looks like smiling at Thanksgiving. Sometimes it sounds like, "That's just how she is." Hannah had learned that love from her grandmother was something to earn. That realization hurt more than anything my mother had ever said about me. There was one person in our family who never played that ranking game. My father, Walter. When I think of him now, I picture his garage, pine sawdust in the air, an old radio playing softly, metal drawers labeled with masking tape. And Hannah, still small enough for her feet to swing above the floor, sitting on a wooden stool and counting screws for her grandfather. The one place none of my mother's rankings seemed to matter was my father's garage. Walter kept an old radio above his workbench. It played weather reports, baseball scores, and songs he had known longer than I had been alive. Underneath it were metal drawers labeled with masking tape, screws, hinges, washers, drill bits. Hannah loved those drawers. When she was 9, my father taught her how to measure a board before cutting it. She rushed, marked the wrong spot, and ended up with a piece of pine that was too short. She looked terrified, as if she had failed some important test. Dad simply turned the tape measure around and handed it back to her. A bad cut doesn't make you a bad builder. You measure again. Then he showed her how to start over. That was how he was with her. Other people asked children about trophies, scholarships, careers, and who had won what. My father usually asked Hannah one question: "What did you learn today?" He cared about effort before applause. Years later, I understood how rare that was. Dad had spent most of his adult life teaching woodshop. On weekends, he built shelves, small tables, and cabinets in that garage. He was never wealthy. What he had came from years of paychecks, careful saving, and work done with his own hands. When Hannah was still a child, he opened a custodial account for her future. Hannah was the beneficiary. My mother was named custodian because Hannah was a minor and because my father trusted his wife. She was supposed to protect the money until Hannah was old enough to use it. Near the end of my father's life, he handed me a sealed white envelope. On the front, in his careful handwriting, he had written, "Hannah Mercer, open on your 18th birthday." I kept that envelope for years. I treated it like something sacred. What I never imagined was that while I was protecting the letter, something else he left Hannah would need protection too. People talk about inheritance as money. My father left Hannah something harder to calculate, proof that somebody had seen her clearly before the rest of the family tried to tell her who she was. Because 3 weeks before Hannah turned 18, an ordinary account statement arrived in my mailbox. And the number on it made me sit down. The statement looked ordinary enough when I pulled it from the mailbox. White envelope, credit union logo. Nothing about it suggested that my hands would be shaking 5 minutes later. I opened it at the kitchen table and looked at the balance. Then I looked again. Then a third time. My mind kept trying to turn the number into something else. The account had held a little over $40,000. Now most of it was gone. One withdrawal stood out from everything around it. $38,000. I followed the line across the page until I reached the name tied to the transaction authority. Evelyn Carter. My mother. I did not say the word theft. Not yet. I went upstairs and pulled out the old folder my father had given me years earlier. Inside were copies of the original account papers, along with the records I had kept for my own deposits. Hannah's name was there as beneficiary. My mother's name was there as custodian. That distinction mattered. I sat back down and checked the numbers one more time. For years, I had added $200 every month. I had never missed one. Birthdays, Christmas, car repairs, medical bills, lean months, the deposit still went in. I pulled up my own bank records and matched them against the contributions. They were all there. So was the withdrawal. 3 weeks before Hannah turned 18, nearly everything my father had saved, and much of what I had added, had been pulled out. My first instinct was to call my mother. I opened her contact on my phone. My thumb hovered over the button. Then I stopped. I work in fraud and compliance. One lesson had been drilled into me over the years. People can rewrite conversations. They have a harder time rewriting documents. So I locked my phone and set it face down. I was not staying quiet because I was afraid of her. I was staying quiet because anger was not evidence. For most of my life, my mother had taken things I could not put on a statement, attention, holidays, small moments of pride. She had passed them toward Denise so often that I learned to pretend they had never belonged to me. This was different. This had an account number. The next morning, I took only the paperwork I was legally allowed to use and carried it into Nora Price's office. She read the statement without speaking. Then she looked at me. "Is your daughter the beneficiary?" "Yes." Nora stood, walked to the door, and closed it. When she turned back, her voice was calm. "Then you need to step out of this case." For 1 second, it sounded like she was telling me to walk away. She wasn't. For about 2 seconds, I thought Nora was telling me to walk away. She wasn't. She was telling me how to make sure nobody could later claim I had twisted the facts. Nora explained that because the account belonged to my daughter and the person who authorized the withdrawal was my mother, I could not take part in the internal investigation. "You can be Hannah's mother or the investigator on this file. You cannot be both." I looked at the statement between us. "Then I'm her mother." That afternoon, I signed a conflict disclosure and turned over the documents I was allowed to provide. Another compliance officer took control of the review. After that, I stayed out. That was harder than I expected. I knew where the systems were. I knew what questions to ask. I knew how quickly one account number could lead to another document. But I did not touch any of it. If my mother was going to be held responsible, I would not give her one excuse to say the investigation had been manipulated by an angry daughter. The transaction was formally flagged. The custodial paperwork was compared against the purpose of the account. Then the review began tracing how the $38,000 had been converted into certified funds for a purchase involving someone other than Hannah. I was not given every document. I should not have been. But as Hannah's mother, I was informed that the money had been connected to a vehicle transaction shortly before her birthday. That detail stayed in my head. Then I remembered something Denise had said a few days earlier. She had called me while I was making dinner and mentioned that Mom was planning a huge surprise for Kelsey. She had laughed and said it was something nobody else in the family would be able to top. At the time, I had barely thought about it. Now I did a vehicle, a large certified payment, Kelsey's 18th birthday, and my mother's name tied to all of it. I did not have every page in front of me, but I knew enough. The Jeep. Age had taught me something anger never did. Being right is not the same as being ready. So I did not call my mother. I did not call Denise, and I did not tell Hannah yet. I refused to turn the weeks before her 18th birthday into a countdown filled with fear and family drama. That evening, I waited until Hannah went upstairs. Then I placed the statement in front of Mark. "I need to show you something." He read it slowly. When he finally looked up, he asked, "What are we going to do?" I looked toward the stairs. "We're going to make sure Hannah never thinks that money was the measure of what she deserved." Mark studied me for a moment. Then he went down to the garage. When he came back, he was carrying a folder I had not seen in almost 3 years. Mark set the folder on the kitchen table and opened it. Inside were 3 years of notes. Deposit slips, handwritten totals, printed statements, and a yellow legal pad where we tracked every extra dollar we could spare. The plan had started after Thanksgiving 3 years earlier. My mother spent most of dinner talking about Kelsey's future. Then she turned to Hannah and suggested she should be realistic. Community college might suit her better, she said, because not everyone was meant for a 4-year university. Hannah went quiet. Later that night, Mark and I sat at the kitchen table with cold coffee between us. We decided that whatever Hannah chose after high school, we wanted her to start with options. So we saved. Mark picked up extra shifts. I moved part of every bonus into the account. We kept our old cars longer than planned. Hannah never knew. By then, she worked weekends at a bookstore, paid some of her own application fees, and planned to spend 2 years at community college before transferring. She wanted to avoid student debt. "Starting debt-free isn't failing," Mark said. A week after we found the missing money, we bought the certified pre-owned Mustang GT Hannah had admired for months. We paid for it from our savings. No loan, no lien. The final title paperwork would put the car in Hannah's name. That evening, Mark asked me something I did not want to answer. "Do you want the Mustang because Hannah needs it, or because your mother needs to see it?" I looked at the calculator. Part of me wanted to see my mother go quiet. But if the car became a way to prove Hannah was worth more than Kelsey, then I would still be using my mother's measuring stick. "Hannah needed that car before Mom ever bought the Jeep," I said. That was the truth. I called Daniel Reed and arranged for him to bring the paid-in-full paperwork and title packet to the birthday dinner after the final signature was ready. In my bag, I carried Hannah's statement, the custodial documents, and my father's unopened letter. I had prepared for favoritism. I had not prepared to hear my mother explain it like a moral philosophy, and that brought me back to the dining room. Daniel stood in the doorway with the manila envelope. My mother looked at the Mustang keys. "You cannot possibly have paid cash for that car." I looked at Daniel. He looked at me. I nodded. Then I rested my hand on the folder inside my bag. Daniel's envelope would show how I paid for the Mustang. The papers in my bag would force my mother to explain how she paid for the Jeep. Daniel crossed the room and placed the manila envelope in front of me. He did not mention my mother or the Jeep. He only said, "Everything you asked for is in there. Paid in full. No lien." I opened the packet and handed the title paperwork to Hannah. Her name was on it. My mother looked at the papers, then at the Mustang keys. "Fine," she said. "You wasted your savings on a sports car. That doesn't make you responsible." I did not defend myself. "Then let's talk about responsibility. How did you pay for Kelsey's Jeep?" The room went quiet. I took Hannah's statement from my bag and laid it on the table. I simply turned it toward my mother and pointed to one line, $38,000. Then I placed the custodial paperwork beside it. Hannah Mercer, beneficiary. My mother barely looked down. I was the custodian. I had authority. Authority to protect it, not permission to spend it on somebody else's child. For most of my life, whenever my mother hurt me, I explained her behavior for her. Maybe she meant well. Maybe I was too sensitive. That night, I stopped. There comes an age when you stop asking why someone keeps treating you badly and start asking a better question. How much longer am I going to allow it? Denise finally spoke. She said my mother had promised the Jeep down payment came from her certificate of deposit. My mother stiffened. Then she said something worse than a denial. Hannah wasn't going to use that money wisely anyway. I asked what she meant. My mother looked at Hannah and said, community college was hardly a serious plan. Kelsey had a scholarship. Kelsey had direction. Then she said, I put the money where it could actually make a difference. Kelsey stared at the keys in her hand. Grandma, is my Jeep Hannah's money? It's family money. Hannah did not cry. She looked at the Jeep keys, then at the $15 bracelet on the table. That was when I understood something about greed. It does not always begin with wanting more for yourself. Sometimes it begins with believing you have the right to decide what another person deserves. Then my mother reached for my father. She said he would have understood. She said he wanted both girls taken care of. I pulled the sealed white envelope from my bag. Walter's handwriting was still clear on the front. For Hannah, dear, open on your 18th birthday. Hannah looked at me. Is that Grandpa's? I nodded. For the first time that night, my mother stopped looking at the bank statement. She stared at the letter. If you are still listening this far, please leave a comment below and tell me how satisfied you are with the story so far. It helps me know there are still people walking beside me through this journey. Your presence is the greatest encouragement I have to keep telling you the final part. Hannah held the envelope with both hands. For a moment, nobody moved. Outside the private room, I could hear silverware touching plates and the low murmur of people who had no idea what had just happened on the other side of the door. Hannah slid one finger beneath the flap. The paper made a soft tearing sound. She unfolded the letter slowly. My father's handwriting filled most of the page. She read in silence at first. He told her he did not know what kind of life she would choose. Maybe college, maybe a trade, maybe her first apartment, a job in another town, or something none of us could imagine yet. He wrote that the money was there to give her a foundation, not a prize, not a ranking, a foundation. Then Hannah stopped. Her eyes stayed on one line longer than the others. She read it aloud. Never let somebody else's opinion become the price tag on your life. My eyes went straight to the little bracelet box still sitting on the table. $14.99. For 18 years, my mother had treated value like something she could assign. My father had understood something she never did. Money can help a young person begin a life, but being seen clearly by one decent adult can help them carry themselves through the rest of it. Hannah folded the letter once, then looked at my mother. Her voice was quiet. Did Grandpa ever tell you this money was for Kelsey? My mother shifted in her chair. She said Dad had always cared about the whole family. She said he would have wanted everyone treated fairly. She never answered Hannah's question. That was the answer. I had spent weeks gathering statements, checking documents, and making sure the Mustang could not be dismissed as borrowed money. But none of those things changed Hannah the way that letter did. She sat straighter, not because she had won a car, because someone she loved had left behind proof that her worth had never depended on winning anything. I looked at my mother. You didn't embarrass Hannah tonight. You showed everyone who you are. I kept my voice level. Anything involving Hannah's account would go through the credit union and our attorney from that point forward. Then I told her one more thing. You will never rank my daughter against Kelsey again. Mark stood beside me. Hannah slipped her grandfather's letter into her bag. The three of us turned toward the door. As we passed Kelsey's chair, she reached out and caught Hannah lightly by the wrist. Hannah stopped. Kelsey looked at her, then down at the Jeep keys in her own hand. I didn't know. Kelsey kept her hand on Hannah's wrist for only a second. Then she let go. Grandma told Mom she was using her own money. Hannah looked at her for a long moment. She did not yell. She did not accuse Kelsey of stealing anything. She only said, "You still let her say those things about me." Kelsey's face changed. She looked down at the Jeep keys. I did. That was all. No excuse. No speech about being caught in the middle. Just 2 words. I stood there watching both girls and realized something I should have understood years earlier. They had not created this competition. The adults had. We had placed them in separate lanes before they were old enough to understand what winning meant. Then we applauded one girl whenever she pulled ahead and taught the other to smile while being left behind. I wondered what would happen if nobody stopped it. Would Hannah and Kelsey still resent each other at 40 because of a scoreboard their grandmother started before either of them understood money? Hannah finally nodded. Not forgiveness. Not yet. Just acknowledgement. Then we left. The days after the dinner were quieter than the dinner itself, but the consequences kept moving. The internal review continued without me. The remaining money in Hannah's account was frozen, so no additional withdrawals could be made. Our attorney sent a preservation notice covering the account records and related documents. Then my mother received a formal demand letter asking her to explain the transaction and return the custodial funds that had been used for someone other than Hannah. Nobody told me she was going to prison. Nobody made promises like that. The letter simply made clear that if the matter was not resolved, it could move into a more serious legal process. Denise called me 2 days later. She did not apologize. She said, "You could have handled that privately." I listened until she stopped talking. Then I said, "Mom made Hannah's worth public. The money was already a formal matter before dinner." Denise tried to answer. I ended the call. I had spent too many years explaining facts until other people felt comfortable with them. That night, Hannah came into the kitchen after Mark had gone upstairs. She sat across from me and twisted the sleeve of her sweater around one hand. For a while, she said nothing. Then she looked at me. "Did I ruin the family? Did I ruin the family?" Hannah's question stayed between us. The house was quiet. The dishwasher had finished its cycle, and the only sound in the kitchen was the refrigerator kicking on behind me. I looked at my daughter and realized that winning one argument had not erased 18 years of being ranked. She saw Denise angry, Kelsey embarrassed, my mother under review, a birthday dinner that nobody would remember for cake or candles. If Grandma hadn't tried to give me anything, none of this would have happened, she said. I shook my head. No, if she hadn't taken what wasn't hers, none of this would have happened. Hannah looked down at her hands. I told her, boundaries can feel like destruction when a family has spent years depending on one person to absorb the damage. That did not mean the boundary was wrong. Over the next week, my mother left several voicemails. None of them began with an apology. She said we needed to fix the family. She said people were talking. She said my father would hate what I was doing. She said I had embarrassed Denise. Then came the one I expected. Call me before this goes too far. I did not call. Our attorney had already advised me to keep anything involving Hannah's money in writing, so that was what I did. If there was a question about the account, it went through email or counsel. For years, my mother had been strongest on the phone. She could change tone, rewrite a sentence halfway through, and leave you wondering whether you had heard her correctly. Paper did not work that way. One thing became clear as the messages piled up. My mother kept saying, "People are talking." She rarely said, "Hannah is hurt." That difference told me almost everything. Some people are not most afraid of losing the family. They are afraid of losing control over the story the family tells about them. I also had to let go of something in myself. A small part of me still wanted my mother to say, "You were right." I had waited for some version of that sentence most of my life. Then I understood how dangerous that was. If I needed her agreement before I could feel peaceful, she was still deciding when I was allowed to be free. A few weeks later, Hannah was working her usual shift at the bookstore when Kelsey walked in. I happened to be there dropping off Hannah's lunch. Kelsey had not arrived in the Jeep. Through the front window, I could see her father's old sedan parked at the curb. Kelsey stood just inside the bookstore, holding her keys in one hand. Hannah looked through the front window at the old sedan, then back at her cousin. "We sold it," Kelsey said. Hannah did not ask how much they got for the Jeep. Kelsey seemed relieved by that. "I didn't want to drive it anymore." Hannah nodded once. "You didn't steal it?" Kelsey looked down. "No, but I liked being the one she picked." That sentence landed differently than an apology. It did not erase what had happened. It did not excuse the years when Kelsey accepted being favored and said nothing, but it was honest. Hannah leaned against the counter. "I spent years wanting her to pick me." She looked toward the window. Then she said, "I don't anymore." I stood a few feet away and let the silence stay where it was. For the first time, I understood that favoritism does not only injure the child who gets less, it also teaches the favored child to mistake being chosen for being loved. Both girls had something to unlearn. They did not hug. They did not promise to become best friends. They simply stopped treating each other like opponents in a contest neither of them had created. Denise later confirmed that selling the Jeep had been her family's decision. They wanted no part of keeping a vehicle tied to disputed money. Over the next few weeks, the financial side moved more slowly. My mother did not lose everything. There was no dramatic ending where every consequence arrived in a single afternoon. She used a certificate of deposit and part of her personal savings to return a large portion of the money. The rest went into a formal repayment arrangement. The review stayed on record, and her control over anything connected to Hannah's funds ended. That mattered most to me. Hannah had control of her own future again. She also kept the plan she had made before any of this happened. Community college first. The bookstore on weekends. Then a transfer after 2 years, if that still made sense to her. One evening, Mark looked over her tuition estimate and said, "Debt-free is still a pretty good way to start adulthood." Hannah smiled. This time, it was not the family smile. It was smaller than that, but real. A few days later, Daniel called me from the dealership. The Mustang title was ready. Hannah went upstairs, came back wearing her jacket, and slipped her grandfather's letter into the inside pocket. Mark grabbed his keys. I picked up my purse. Then the three of us drove to the dealership together. The dealership lights had come on by the time we arrived. The late fall wind cut across the lot and pushed dry leaves along the curb. Hannah walked between Mark and me with her grandfather's letter tucked inside her jacket. Daniel had the title ready. The paperwork was simple. Hannah signed where he pointed, checked her name, and held the final title in both hands before folding it carefully. Then we stepped back outside. The Mustang was parked near the front of the lot. Hannah opened the driver's door and sat behind the wheel. She did not look like someone who had won a prize. She looked like someone who had finally been handed responsibility for her own direction. She pulled Walter's letter from her pocket and placed it on the dashboard. Her finger rested on one line. "Never let somebody else's opinion become the price tag on your life." I stood beside the open passenger door and watched her read it again. 18 years earlier, when I first held Hannah, I thought being a mother meant protecting her from every person who might hurt her. I know better now. I cannot stop every cruel word. I cannot prevent every disappointment. But I can make sure she never learns to call pain love just because it comes from family. For a while, I thought the Mustang would prove something to my mother. I wanted her to look at Hannah and finally understand that my daughter was worth more than a $15 bracelet. Then I realized how wrong that idea was. If I needed Evelyn to declare Hannah valuable, I was still giving her the power to decide value in the first place. Hannah did not need that power returned to her grandmother. Neither did I. Some people spend half their lives trying to earn approval from someone who decided long ago not to give it. Eventually, freedom is not being chosen. It is realizing you do not have to keep standing in line. Hannah closed the door. The sound was solid and final. She turned the key and the engine came to life. Through the windshield, she looked toward the road. Ahead of her were school, work, bills, choices, mistakes, and ordinary days. Her life, not my mother's version of it. Hers. I thought about that $14.99 sticker one last time. It seemed ridiculous now. Walter had been right. People do not come with price tags. If you were in my place, would you have told the truth at that birthday dinner, or handled it behind closed doors? And more importantly, are you satisfied with where Hannah, Kelsey, and Evelyn ended up?